Okay, so we're going to talk about autopsies now. It's a whole little section on autopsies. All right, here we go. So, an autopsy is also known as a post-mortem examination, is a highly specialized surgical procedure that consists of a thorough examination of the corpse to determine cause and manner of death and to evaluate any disease or injury that may be present. So a similar examination on different species is called a necropsy. So if we do it on something that isn't a human, then it's called necropsy. We do it on a human and it's an autopsy. So deaths that require an autopsy are homicide, obviously. So if we think that murder was involved, we think foul play, then they're going to have an autopsy done in order to yield forensic clues, include death from injury, poisoning, or foul play. Anytime children die, so if children die and we know it wasn't like cancer or something like that, then they are going to have an autopsy. They're supposed to, because pretty much they shouldn't die unless we know of some underlying disease. Unusual deaths, so anytime there's an unexpected death, so just, a person they don't have any known illnesses, relatively healthy and young, then they should have an autopsy done. Now, sometimes their family can decline it, but they should at least be offered. Autopsies may also be performed at the request of the family or deceased. So you can also ask for one. So if someone someone goes to the hospital for like a routine checkup and they end up dying and the family wants to have an autopsy to see if the doctor made a mistake, they can ask for one. Deaths that do not require an autopsy include the elderly, so we expect them to die at some point. So if they are just dying of what we think is natural causes, then they're not going to have an autopsy. And anyone with a terminal illness. So if someone has an illness that we know causes death, then they're not going to have an autopsy. All right, so who will be performing it? So while many types of medical doctors are capable of performing autopsies, most states or local governments mandate that an appointed forensic pathologist to do this kind of work. These appointees are called medical examiners.
Nate, your phone
Those
is in the
announcements.
main office. Nate, your phone is in the main office. Thank you.
Instead, so we don't always have a lot of medical examiners on hand. So instead, many small and rural communities will have coroners and a coroner system. So to be a coroner, you just have to be able to be elected to the job. So it's like a mayor. They're elected to the position. They don't necessarily have to have any credentials. They just have to be selected. The coroner is also responsible for identifying the body, so saying who it is, notifying the next of kin, collecting and returning any personal belongings or the body on the body to the family and the deceased, and signing the death certificate with what they think happened to him. So that's the only scary part, is because some coroners have been doing it long enough that they really do have a pretty good job what they're doing, but some were just elected. They're just an elected official that may not actually have the background in it. So that's a little worrisome if you're in a small place that only has coroners available. When the body is received in the body bag, the seals of the bag are broken and the body is photographed first. So the first, they're just going to take pictures inside the bag. In a forensic autopsy, it's important at this stage for the medical examiner to note the clothing of the deceased and the position of the clothing. This is because once the clothing is removed for the examination, any evidence pertaining to that position of the clothing cannot be documented. So a lot of documentation is going to take place before the autopsy even begins. The body will also be x-rayed while still in the body bag. So they're going to look at everything before messing anything up. We want to know how the body got to us, if they're, what's on it, if the bones are broken, anything they're wearing. Why do I always yawn? I think it's just because I do these after school usually, so I'm very tired. Evidence is collected off of the external surfaces of the body, hair samples, gunshot residue, fibers, paint chips, any other foreign objects. So anything that is in the body to collect, they will. If it is a homicide investigation, the hands of the deceased will be placed in bags on the scene. The medical examiners will open the bags and take the residue from the fingernail samples. Then the bags are folded and submitted with the samples as part of evidence. Because if you were attacked, if you think it was homicide, then they might have, they might have scraped their face, have their skin nails that are attacked or under their fingernails, have anything that might be pertaining to the case. In some cases, a special UV radiation is used to enhance and just to be able to see secretions on the skin or clothes. The radiation causes these secretions to fluoresce, so they may be collected or sampled. So it helps us see different kinds of liquids that can be on the body. Once the evidence has been collected, the body is removed from the bag or sheet and undressed, and the wounds are examined. So there's a whole full record in the autopsy report of just what wounds are on the body. Literally every little thing is going to be documented. During the external examination, you're looking for injuries, contusions, lacerations, which means a cut, insect bite marks, and needle injection sites, penetrating wounds. Diagrams and photographs are very important. Once you cut into the body, you cannot repair it. So therefore, these diagrams are just, you want to accurately represent what the body looked like before you did anything to it. This is just an example of actual autopsy reports of them saying what happened to these people. After the body is cleaned, the body is weighed and measured before being placed on the autopsy table for examination. Now, these tables are typically slanted like this. Aluminum table, so it's a metal table with raised edges that has several faucets and drains used to wash away any collecting blood during the internal examination. So it's like, you can see it's like kind of like a very shallow little metal tub that they have a drain at the bottom of, and faucets that they can spray things down in. The body is placed face up on the table. The body block, see the saying, this block underneath them is under the patient's back. It looks like this. So that's a body block. There's a rubber or plastic brick that opens the corpse's chest to protrude open forward, while the arms and neck fall backward. So this position makes the chest just easier to cut open. So you can see a little body block as a sponge in the little piggy autopsy. So body fluids, blood, urine, etc., are withdrawn from the body and subjected to a comprehensive toxicology test, so they can check lots of things through their blood or their urine. They can also check things in the vitreous humor, which is the fluid in your eyes. They can check that for toxins. So now the actual process of the autopsy. So the internal examination starts with a large, deep, Y-shaped incision that is made from shoulder to shoulder, meeting at the breastbone, and extends all the way down to the pubic bone. So you can see it here. It's a Y-shaped cut. So you just cut here and here, starts from shoulder here into a Y, and then all the way down to the pubic bone. When a woman is being examined, the Y incision is curved around the bottom of her breast before cutting into the breastbone. So if we were to cut just straight down, for most women, that'd be cutting into their breast tissue. So most of the time, instead of coming straight, they're going to go around. So fetal pig necropsy. So just kind of showing you same thing. They're going to cut that Y and then all the way down. For most of these, they still have their little umbilical cord, which is sad. So they do cut around it before going down to the pubic bone. Now, the next step is to peel back the skin, muscle and soft tissue using a scalpel. Once this is done, the chest flap is pulled up over the face, exposing the rib cage and the neck muscles. 2 cuts are made on each side of the rib cage, and then the rib cage is pulled from the skeleton after dissecting the tissue behind it using the scalpel. So basically, this opens all this up, and they're going to, remember they cut this, so they're going to open this flap up, right? And it actually kind of fold over their face, generally, okay? And then these pieces here are going to open to the side, okay? So they're going to pull the skin back, pull the skin up. Then you have your rib cage exposed. Using basically the saw, they're going to cut, literally just cut through the rib cage and kind of just take it off, okay? The organs come out as a block. So with the organs exposed, a series of cuts are made that they know where to make their specific cuts. They detach the larynx, the esophagus, various arteries and ligaments. Next, the medical examiner severs there we go, which means cut. So severs the organs attachment to the spinal cord, as well as the attachment to the bladder and rectum. So once this is done, basically after they make all these series of cuts, you literally can just take out the organs in one big block. So they call that an organ block. And then those organs are then dissected on their own to see what they are composed of for further investigation. So during this dissection, the various organs are examined and weighed. Any unusual size or weight of the organs can show possible mechanisms of death. Tissue samples are taken. These samples take the form of slices that can be easily viewed under a microscope. Brain trauma or other abnormalities can be seen. Heart, possible trauma or infarction. You can see remnants of a heart attack caused by local lack of oxygen to the obstruction of the tissue's blood supply. They look at the lungs, trauma, or if it's full of fluid. They look in your stomach. This can sometimes be helpful in figuring out time of death. Remember, we can look at the stomach contents or if it's in your small intestine or your large intestine. Liver has a great place to look for toxins. Small intestine ingested poisons or other trauma. Large intestine ingested poisons. Kidneys is another place to look for toxicology things. Major blood vessels are also bisected and examined. So they look for anything that could have caused death in all these organs. So the examiner makes a cut with the scalpel from behind one ear. Okay. From behind one ear across the forehead. Okay, so we go here, we go across the forehead to the other ear, and then around. Okay, so you just go all the way around. The cut is divided, and then the scalp is pulled away. So don't look if it's gross. Like just don't even, just cover it up with your hand and listen. Okay, so then we're trying to expose the brain. They are going to look at the brain. And the scalp is pulled away from the skull in two flaps. The front flap goes over the patient's face, and the rear goes down the back. So it just kind of opens it like that. The skull is cut with an electric saw to create a cap that can be pried off, exposing the brain. After the examination, the body has an open, an empty chest cavity with butterfly chest flaps. The top of the skull is missing, and the skull flaps are pulled over the face and neck to prepare the body for the funeral home. So basically, they just put it all back together and stitched up. So you've been seeing these kind of markings in our body farm videos. You should have seen, like, why were they all sewn up like that? It's because they had an autopsy. So that's the way it looks. The skull cap is put back in place and held there by closing and by putting down the skin and sewing around it. So everything is sewn back together afterwards. An average autopsy case takes about 4 hours. There is about an hour and a half, or there's about half an hour before and after the autopsy for doing the external examination, so just looking at the body and recording everything, and then the dictation and paperwork. The autopsy can take anywhere from 1 hour to 2 hours if it's an uncomplicated case. If it's a complicated case, like a homicide, it can take 4 to 6 hours. So they can't do that many in a day. I think I'll stop there, and we'll just do a tiny little bit next week. Yeah. On the autopsy part.